So I have something here that I wanted to talk about. I'm not going to do a full build restoration video on this, but I've been waiting for this kind of thing to come up so I can address it. Sooner or later, you are going to encounter this when you're doing ceramic repairs, and it's what we call sprung china. And it usually happens most dramatically with bone china. It's very common with bone china, and it can be very dramatic in how much it will move. What happens is, if you can see the edges on some of these borders, it's thick and thin, and it's different shapes. It's wavy. So this is a poured slip. It gets poured into a mold. The plaster at the edge of that mold absorbs the moisture. Then you pour the slip out, and you have this coating of a semi-thick coating on the inside of the mold. And when that dries out, they pull that apart. And then when you fire these things at a high temperature, they shrink like 15%, which is significant. And in that shrinkage, due to differences in the amount of liquid in different parts of the slip and different thicknesses in the walls and the different shapes and the contours, folds, curvatures, all those things add up to a bunch of stresses that are built into the object as it shrinks. And it's fine, it's not going to hurt anything, but then when the piece breaks, you get this dramatic, as we can see in this case, that's a good, I don't know, 3/30 seconds, maybe a 1/16 of an inch there, spread apart. And it's more in some places and less in others. If you zoom in, you can see how much this has moved. Now, this is like a spring. That's why we call it sprung. You see that's moving there. And if I do that a lot, you could actually spread the cracking on this one. But this one has cracks. This one crack goes all the way around here and comes back to the other side. And this one goes down to the bottom. There are 3 or 4 of these. But I want to show you how much movement there is in this, how much that can move. And I'm pressing pretty hard to move that. So how do you deal with this? Well, there are a number of ways. On something small like this, I can just put my glue. Now, the problem is I need to know this is going to work. So often I'll do a rehearsal, and I'll take and do my taping, or I put a tape on it and I pull it tight. And I'm going to work my way around and close all these cracks. Knowing that I can do that, knowing that they'll line up, then I can put the adhesive on there and pull it back together again. But if you put your adhesive on there, and this is going to be something like Elmer's glue or something, I don't have a whole lot of working time to work with that. So I need to know that these cracks are going to close up first before I commit to putting the adhesive on there. So I'll do a rehearsal and see what I need to do to bring these closed. Sometimes you can do them one at a time, and they're separate so they won't affect the others. I will film this when I go around to doing that, but I'm not going to show the whole build, but we will show how I close this up. So the first thing I would try is something easy, like masking tape. Press it on there tight, pull it a little bit at a time, close that up. And if I know that's going to work, then I'll take all the tape off and start over again with adhesive in it. Another way to do that is with rubber bands. And on this you have this cone shape, essentially, that if I put rubber bands on there, these should all, theoretically, these should all close up. And the thing about rubber bands is they only have a certain amount of strength. But if you multiply them, you don't just put the same amount of strength a whole bunch of times. It actually adds up. So if you put a lot of rubber bands on there, you end up with a very lot of holding pressure, shrinking pressure on this. So that's another way of doing it. Another way is with tourniquets, where you wrap something around this and tighten it, like a cordage with a twist in it. I'll show you these demonstrations later on when I do these, how that works. But we need to do a rehearsal closing on this to see how each of these cracks is going to behave when I start putting pressure on them. And then once when I find out what works, then I'll commit to it with the adhesive. There's also another piece that goes in here too. So this, I'll have to close all these pieces up with this piece in place so that I can make sure everything lines up when they all close. But as you can see, there's a significant gap in all these. Now, if this was something large with thick walls and lots of compound curves in it, say like a platter, I've seen platters where it was sprung a good 1 inch. It's insane how much that was sprung on that piece. I was actually able to fix that, and it was too bad that I couldn't get it on film. Anyway, I'll come back and show you how I can, different methods of closing this. So I'm going to just do a demo on how I would use different methods to close this up. So the first thing you do is you put your the big pieces in that you want everything to line up, and this can be crazy difficult too. So the first easiest method is with the old tape stuff, where you put the tape on, press it on, and pull it tight in a couple different places. Now the thing is, it's sprung, right? So it should theoretically be able to pull it right back where it was, but you need to make sure that none of these pieces are hanging up the piece that you're trying to pull together. So, and you might have to do it in stages. Like I'm pulling this tight, and I'll put more over here and pull it tight there and pull it tight there. And as you accumulate these, you'll close that up. Okay? So I'm not going to do a full demo on that, closing it up. I'm just going to show you different methods and how they work. Alright, so I'm going to leave this piece in place because that's the loose piece. It's holding me in place there. The other way is with what I call the tourniquet method, where you would wrap some cordage around it, and sometimes you may have to put some tape on that to keep it from moving on you. And then you tighten that with a stick that you twist. This one's not going to work because it's going to ride up on the cone. But sometimes you can tape that piece in place or hook it around part of the object. Tighten that up and it will close that gap. And this can apply quite a bit of pressure that way. Okay, that's another method. It's not working too well on this piece, but you never know what shape you're going to be having to work with. The third method is with rubber bands. And that's not much pressure, but if you put 20 or 30 of those on there, it adds up to a lot of pressure. And this way it's incremental, so that if you need to adjust as you're going, you can do so. If you need to nudge pieces so that they will align easier. And again, each one of these isn't very strong, but they add up. It's a cumulative pressure. It adds up to be pretty significant. So that will eventually close that gap. It's already about half the distance it was before. And you need to kind of stop as you go and adjust and squeeze and, you know, finesse these pieces into alignment. Also, you can also see if it's getting close to closing, you can go ahead and put your adhesive in there, especially when it's getting very close. Put your adhesive in there and then continue to do that. But you need to make sure that you're not going to get stuck with your adhesive curing on you before you got your alignment right. That's going to create a lot of frustrating work to have to undo that. So this is the third way. We just keep piling these on until that closed up. All right, well, I'm going to get ready to bond this this figurine. This is I've done some rehearsal builds and some experimentation, and I think I know what I'm doing. So no, I know what I'm doing. I think I can pull it off. So I've just determined this is a non-porous material, which is great because it makes it a lot easier to use a bonding agent that I know will penetrate into all these cracks and hold it very securely. So now we're going to start putting it together, and I've determined that a combination of masking tape and rubber bands will do what I need to do here. So I kind of have to systematically do this. The first thing I'm going to do is tape in this loose piece that I just put in. And that's just a matter of trying to line up these pieces as I go as best I can. And I've also determined that there's no way I'm going to get great alignment on everything on this. It's just not going to happen. But I have to go for whatever the best I can get. And just dive right in and start doing it. So I'm going to address this loose piece first and try to tape it in place wherever the alignment is good, so that whenever I squeeze it together, it doesn't get hung up somewhere. And it's just a matter of piece of tape one at a time, pulling it together. Press the tape down nice and tight. Okay, now it's going to get a little hairy. Now, if you're going to do this sort of thing, you need to be really careful, because one slip, if this thing breaks and I slip, then you could get cut very badly. So the idea is put as much pressure as you need to and no more. Okay. And as I go, I'm checking all the alignment on the other cracks. I don't want anything getting hung up anywhere. And where I have good alignment, I tape. Getting this loose piece secure is very important because it's the one piece that can move around independently. Some of this I'm not going to tape because it's going to get squeezed together when I do the next step. Okay, now hopefully I'll do some of this so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm pressing this crack together here. And I'm holding it together because one piece of tape isn't going to do it. We got to get the several on here. So now I'm moving over to the rubber bands to squeeze some of these other cracks together. They're really sprung and they're not lining up. So I have two pieces of her scarf here, her shawl, that I can get the rubber bands to keep it from riding up on this cone-shaped thing. So that's good. So I just taken rubber bands. They're not really, I mean, they're not that strong, but if the accumulative adding of these, they do get stronger by adding more. It's incremental. And as you put them on, you go around and squeeze and nudge and check the alignment as we go. And sometimes we can add a piece of tape. I'm not ready for more tape yet. Okay. Just keep adding these. Pretty good amount of pressure on there now. And I'm I hear that little crack, that little pop. That was a piece going into alignment, hopefully. Okay. There's a lot of lines to keep track of here. There goes another crunchy bit. Just don't rush, just take your time. Put a few more pieces of tape on here to try to close these gaps. A good one. And the press and stretch. Ow.
A couple spots here where I gotta pull this tight.
It's tricky because a lot of places where we would normally pull and stretch and get it nice and tight, it's hard to do that because there's so much terrain, uneven terrain here. Alright, now I still need to be able to get glue on these cracks, so I can't tape it completely. So, but I'm going to use Hixtol on this, so as long as I can get to the crack, I can put adhesive on it and close it. And then, you know, whatever I don't get, I can pick up the difference between when I take the tape off. It'll still be strong enough. When I take the tape off, I can put it everywhere there was tape. Alright, so I've been putting rubber bands. I've added a few more here and here, and now I'm adding them vertically. I'm going to squeeze this. I'm trying to squeeze the bottom closed and pull up on it. And let's see what we have. I need to get some over. I think that's about all we can do here. So, we'll, I'm going to mix some Hixtol, fresh Hixtol, and we'll apply it to this next. Okay, I've heated this in the hot box for about 20 minutes or half an hour, and I need to put some Hixtol on it. I have fresh batch mixed here, and get this stuff on there while it's still warm. This is thin ceramic, so it's going to cool fairly quickly. I'm trying to work fast so I can get enough of this on here while it's hot. Well, that's about all I can see for now. A little bit more here. Everything else is underneath tape. But I think I have enough on here that it'll grasp. So that when this Hixel cures, I can take off the rubber bands and tape, and it won't open up again. I'm just flooding these cracks because some of them aren't completely closed. So I've just taken this out of the hot box. It's been there overnight. I had a lot of Hixel on here, and I didn't want it to get stuck to the bottom of the hot box. I'd rather have it get stuck to this saran wrap, cling wrap. So that was to protect it from getting stuck to the hot box. And so I'm pulling it off now. That's enough. I'm going to pull some of this tape off up near the top just so I can wipe it better. Then the alignment's going to be off from what I usually try to achieve, but it was just because we had so many pieces way out of alignment. Just getting it glued closed is a chore, so that's what we're going by. So I've got to wipe this to get the hardening, not quite fully cured Hixel off before it gets fully cured, and then I have to shave it off with a razor blade. This way at least I can clean some of it with some alcohol. And I have alcohol, 91% alcohol on a piece of paper towel, and I'm wiping up the excess. A lot of this I will still have to scrape off with a razor blade. But anytime you can save yourself some work, you will appreciate yourself later. Alright, I'm putting some Hixel on these cracks. This has not been heated today. And in fact, it's cold. So I'm putting the Hixel right on this crack so that it won't run through the crack. It's going to sit on the edge out on the exterior. It'll fill, hopefully it'll slump right in there and fill that. And the Hixel's starting to get thick. I will run. This object is cold, and I want the Hixel to penetrate in the crack instead of just sitting out here on top of it. So when I'm done applying this, I will run a hairdryer over it just to warm that spot up. It'll soften the Hixel and hopefully it will penetrate into the crack. And at this point, it's a fill in there. Alright, so now it's time to take all this stuff off. It's the next day, and I've taken this out of the hot box. And we got there's my cling wraps protecting it from getting stuck to my hot box. And we'll just start taking off these rubber bands. Alright, and then the rest is just tape. And some of this will have to be scraped off with a razor blade. There's too much Hixtol got under the tape. So the method I used is you're going to have a lot of stuff holding these cracks closed. And so you're going to have to put your Hixtol on in a way that it's going to run down these channels, it's going to run down along the tape, it'll run under the rubber bands, and it'll pull in certain places, and you're just going to have to scrape that off later. So the idea is to try not to get an extreme amount of that stuff flowing. And that's the reason I put the cling wrap on this, is because I don't know how much of that, once I get it in the hot box, how far that's going to flow down these cracks, come out the bottom, whatever. And that's why I did a second application, because I want to make sure that's closed and tight and strongly bonded before I take all these restraining devices off. So here's what we have, and so as you can see, there are bits of tape, and here's clumps where it pulled underneath the tape or the rubber bands. Out here on that, it's relatively easy to get off. Where it's down inside one of these, that's a little harder, which I'll show you in a minute how we do that. But you can see that the cracks have been pretty well closed up. A couple of them are slightly misaligned, but there's nothing you can do about that. The fact that we got them closed is a good big deal. And so also on the bottom, we've closed up all these cracks. I'm pretty happy with what we got here. There's a couple places where here's an open crack. There's no movement here. This is not going to ever close up again. So I'll put more Hixtol in there, thick Hixtol in there, and it'll fill that. And that's what we'll do here. So for today, I'm going to scrape off the old tape and the extra dried Hixtol, and then I will warm this in the hot box again and do a reapplication on these cracks of some fresh Hixtol to make sure that I'm now getting it in every single crack, no doubt about it. And that's how we're going to proceed. So, as I was saying a moment ago, I want to address this. This is, I showed how to make these. These are double-edged razor blades that are cut in half. And I put masking tape, just two layers of masking tape on here so that the back ends don't cut me. And I use these because they can bend around these weird shapes as I need to. I can scrape this Hixtol off relatively easy. It's not super hard yet. It's tough, but it's not super hard. So we can go along and peel this Hixtol off relatively easy with these. Just go slow, be careful. It's very easy to cut yourself. And you make more of these as you need them. I might go through a couple of these on a job like this. So I'm going to go around and scrape off all the Hixtol and the tape. As you can see, it can bend and flex to the shape of the side of your ceramics as you're working on them. Okay. And the same thing with the tape. This will slice right through it. Peel that off. Alright, I just scraped all the excess Hixtol off, put it in the hot box for an hour, Nice and warm now, and I'm going back over these lines, the crack lines, with more Hixtal, fresh Hixtal, just to make sure I got it in all the full length of the crack. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put the milliput on this after 2 rounds of Hixtal and scraping and wiping and all that jazz. So, and I went ahead and put the milliput on here. And in this case, we're talking about the sprung ceramics. When they break, chances are very good that you're not going to get your alignment as good as you want it. In some cases, the crack didn't even close all the way, but there's nothing you can do about it. It's especially with all the different pieces we had to deal with in this. Often, if it's just one crack, you can pretty much get it better than I got some of these because you're only dealing with one crack. But we have all these different cracks, and we had a loose piece in there that had to be dealt with. And that's a lot of stuff to contend with to get alignment the way you want it. Especially with those, when you start putting tape and things on here, you lose the ability to see what's going on underneath that. So we just deal with it the best we can. So, this is a small figurine, and I'm sure it is amply strong as far as fixing these cracks. Now, so what we have to deal with next is the misalignment. So we put the milliput on there, and it's typical that it looks kind of sloppy like this, but and then we file that down, and often that would take more than one application of milliput and followed with filing to get this right, or get it the way you need it. So, but one of the issues I want to address here is several people have asked me about the comment I made about ramping your fills. And what that means is, for instance, when you have a misalignment of pieces that don't come together, there's a step. And it's important to make that transition smooth. And that's basically what the ramping is. And it's not an official term, it's just what I called it, and it sort of describes what we're talking about. And I'll show you what that means here as I file this. So, on an undulating surface like this, you want to find some file that is going to be able to go across these transitions in a way that allows you to do that ramping. And so on a flat area, you're going to use a flat file. It's where you can get around these corners and things. But the idea is to make that a plane transition across your misalignment. And you'll see in a moment what that means. And essentially what you want to do is try to follow the contours of the surface. It's difficult to describe how to do it and which direction to file, but you essentially want to keep that line so that that's a smooth transition across that. Okay, so in other words, you don't cross this way. It's harder to get that even in a nice smooth step or elimination of a step. So it looks sort of like this. I'm just showing is better than talking. As you can see, I'm trying to keep this alignment so that's as smooth as possible on that step. And occasionally you'll file the wrong way, or your fill wasn't sufficient. And as you file these down, you'll find that you're going to have to go over some of those spots. Now here's a spot where it gets rather tight. I'm going to use a different tool. As long as I maintain that smooth ramp, it doesn't have to be exactly a smooth ramp. You want to get as smooth as possible. And really, what you're trying to do is eliminate a step for the light to catch. So as smooth as you can make this, the better. And you don't have to get it all with files. I'm going to file this, and then I'll run some micro mesh sandpaper over it. Now sometimes you have a compound curve, so it's going two directions. It's going this way and it's going this way curve. So that's, you be patient and work down your curve. See, as you can see, we've got a spot here where we need to come back and fill, but that's okay when you're exposing those areas as we go. Go gently, because even though I'm using files that are not going to damage this glaze, if I file too aggressively, it could. So be careful. The milliput is soft enough, it will give before the glaze does. Okay. This curve is too tight for my flat file, so we use a round. So, just remember, you want to always file off of the step, away from the step, as I'm doing here. You see, got a nice hard line where that breaks. And this is the kind of area where it's really tough. There's such a steep curve here. You want to be really careful. Work your way back into it. Sometimes you can use the light to help you visualize that. Well, this I'm going to go a little bit rough because I want to take that rest of it down with sandpaper, which is less aggressive than the file. Okay, so I don't want to do this whole thing for you, but I want to just demonstrate how this looks. Okay, and now I'm going to use a piece of micro mesh. This is 2400, and we're going to run this over the... You would wait until you get the whole thing done, but I want to show you how this works. So, first I'm taking off the top of the step. Again, working off the top. As if you go this way, you're going to pull back into the step. So, these little lines that you can see inside here, a lot of little things like that are going to be covered with the cold glaze when we go over this. So between the micro mesh, between the milliput and the micro mesh and the cold glaze, you'll get a nice smooth transition. Here's another spot where we need to do a little fill. You see the light is catching that step, and there's some little bit of pitting here. As I said, it's very common that you'll have to go over this again at least once, maybe more. You just do it until you don't need to fill it anymore. But this, I wanted to address this ramping issue, and this is what it looks like. So we're going to do another round of fills on this. When it gets nice and smooth like this, then we do a cold glaze on that a couple of times, followed by micro mesh, and this will be a nice smooth transition. You'll be difficult to feel this with your finger as you go, but essentially, as long as the light doesn't catch it, you won't have a step. And on this undulating garment, as we have on here, it'll be difficult to tell there was ever a break there. Okay, now we're pretty much done with the bonding and the filling portion of this, and from now on it's just painting. So I just wanted to recap what we did here and show you the results. This is about 3 coats of cold glaze on top of the milliput fills. So as you can see, some of them came together very well. You can barely see the cracks. They're totally closed up. Most of them you can't even see, but wherever there is white is where the milliput fills were, and the width of that fill, to make that a smooth transition, the width of that fill indicates just how much of a step there was, how far off they were in not meeting. So this is probably the worst part right here. And, that's not too bad, really, considering how badly this thing was warped. And we got a very, very good result. It's very strong, and we got this closed pretty well compared to how far off it was warped. There's a little bit on the bottom also, and again, you can barely see most of it. So that ends this episode of dealing with these warped breakages, where the thing, when it's sprung, what we call sprung breakage. And so from now on it's just going to be painting, and we're not going to show that since this is not a build. I just wanted to address that issue of the fills.